Hey there, it's Robyn Barber from Shawn Petite's creative team. I'm creating for you a mixed media project inspired by the new year. I've got some words that I want to focus on, and this is my project to remind me to refocus. Here's some of the tools I'm using: acrylics and some copper metal. I first start with my canvas, and I'm going to use some modeling paste, some acrylic paint in green gray. I've also got on my palette a little shiny acrylic, antique gold, and finally one of my favorite deep neutrals, Payne's Gray. I just take my canvas, it's a 6x8 canvas, and I'm using a mixture of the colors in different areas. I start with the antique gold and I just do crisscross strokes. Then I add in some of that green gray. And occasionally I'll dip my brush in the water a little bit, but I tend to not clean off my brush when I'm doing a muted background like this, where I'm just kind of blending in all the colors. I chose these colors because I'm using some copper and I'm going to distress that copper, and I thought these colors would mimic the colors that are going to come out in my copper. Now, after my canvas has dried, I'm going to take Shawn's stencil, the Geo Minis, and I'm going to use that modeling paste. And I will not do the entire canvas because I'm going to use that copper on the bottom part of the canvas. So I just start grabbing a little of the modeling paste on to my palette knife. And I don't do the entire square or the stencil. I'll just use little bits and pieces. And then I'll gently lift it straight up and turn it a little bit and add some more modeling paste in a different direction. I won't show it on film, but I do also use the modeling paste on the edges, so you want to kind of wrap your design around the edge. And because I'm using it in a random pattern, I don't have to wrap it so that it matches exactly. And then I'm going to let that dry. Now I'm ready to add some of those luscious drip down, watered down acrylic. I use a high flow acrylic from Golden, and I just run it along the top edge and let it drip down a little bit, and then I'm going to water my brush down quite a bit. That particular color from Golden is a nickel azo gold. And you don't have to have the high flow acrylics. I like them because they are so fluid, but you'll see I get the same result just watering down that Payne's Gray and letting it drip down. Another good trick is to just grab you a spray bottle and give it a little spritz, and it will help that paint to run down. This is where I'm adding in that watered down Payne's Gray. And again, spraying it and then just dabbing it where it gets a little heavy. And don't forget your edges. I kind of lost some of that azo gold, and so I just added a couple little extra dots there so it would drip down. Now I'm going to start with my copper. I've got a rotary tool, some paper blending stubs, and Q-tips. That's a little metal stylus. It's got a brush on the other end, but I'm not using that for this. And that's a cup and ball tool, and you'll see me use that later on. So you can emboss or deboss with the copper. I'm going to start with a deboss. And so with debossing, you put the stencil on the back side. You can see I've got a Sharpie that I labeled the back side, so you can see throughout the video whether I'm working on the back or the front. And I put the stencil and I taped it onto the back side of the copper. And the first step is you just take a pencil and kind of go through the open areas of your design on your stencil so that when you turn it over, you'll be able to see where your stencil outline is. Then I'm going to finish up right there. I've just cut out so you didn't have to painfully watch me do every single opening. Now I've turned it over and you can barely see it, but it's there, the outline that the pencil caused. And then I'm taking a fairly thick paper blending tool, and I like to use these a lot when I'm using charcoal on my mixed media projects, but I found that it worked great for this debossing with the copper. This is a 36 gauge copper. I got it at Hobby Lobby. You can get copper and aluminum and some other metals. It comes in a roll, and I just cut it to the size that I needed. This big, larger blending tool does a pretty good job of bringing out your design. And then I took that Q-tip, or if you have a smaller blending tool, that works as well. And I just kind of go in there and redefine and get in all the little corners that I can with that smaller tool. And I'm pressing through the stencil. I've got a hard surface underneath. It is just a piece of MDF. And one thing to remember when you're debossing, which is what this is, meaning that the front side of the copper is going to be indented as opposed to embossing, which is raised. The stencil is on the back. You're working mostly on the front side, and you work on a hard surface. Here I have the little metal stylus, and with that I'm again going in all the edges and doing a better outline of each cutout in the stencil. It's a little tedious, but because you've got that stencil as your guide, it goes fairly quickly. And just make sure that you get every little cutout. And there you can see better how the design is coming along. Now what I'm going to do is I've moved my stencil down, and so I'm just going to extend that same pattern across the full width of my piece of copper. So I'll just repeat that process, which is using my pencil and the blending sticks. Now I'm going to use the carved numbers stencil, and I'm going to create the year 2021 across the top of the copper. For this part, I'm going to emboss instead of deboss. So for embossing, you work on the front side, the top of your copper. The work is mostly done on the back, which is opposite of your deboss. But again, you also work on a hard surface. And the steps are pretty much the same. Take your pencil, outline, turn it over, use your blending stub, and then use your stylus. This is just a rotary tool. I use it for sewing, or back in the day when my grandmother was helping me sew. That was used to with carbon paper and your pattern, and you use that rotary tool along the lines of the pattern to transfer your cut marks onto your fabric. And so now it has been found a new use in my studio, and it puts a cute little dotted line on a border for this piece of copper. And I have it on, this is a soft surface, which is only 5 sheets of copy paper or whatever kind of paper you've got. And I just put binder clips at the top to keep it from sliding around. And that just allows, since it's a soft surface and a fine imprint you're trying to make, it works better by using that soft surface instead of the hard surface. So now I'm going to use a special tool for embossing, and it's called a cup and ball tool. I'm just got some scrap fabric that I put underneath my copper. Again, I'm working on the back side. That's the ball, and that's the cup. And I'm just using the ruler to space out my indentions that I'm going to make with the ball. I'm on the back side, starting at the middle, and I'm just going out about every 1/2 inch. You just kind of give that ball a little squiggle, and it provides an indentation in the back, which means I'm embossing, because when I turn it over, the pattern will be raised. Then you take the cup end and you just go around the circle, and this should be done on the hard surface. I think you'll see me move it up to the hard surface to because usually when you're working from the front, you use the hard surface, and on the back, use the soft surface when you're using the cup and ball tool. And I just extend that all the way across. Now I'm going to experiment with my copper. I used ammonia and some vinegar and some table salt. Those are just some photos of where I was distressing it, and here is the unveil this morning. And a lot of the distress has lost some of my pattern, so I'm going to use some of that steel wool and scrub off just a little bit of that coloring, and then I'm going to take my blending tool and start to redefine a few of those shapes that just from me handling it, washing it, and sanding it a little bit, I lost a little bit of my shape, so I'm going to redo some of that. Sorry about the slow-mo I had, so I sped it up a little bit so you didn't have to watch me painfully slowly go through some of those redefinitions. So here's my finished piece of copper, and I've got my finished canvas there after it has dried. I added a little more gesso with some bubble wrap just to brighten it up a little bit. All of that wasn't just too dark. So I'm marking my canvas where the edges of my canvas are. I'm going to just use regular household scissors to cut that edge. I'm not going to cut that corner completely out. I'm just going to cut up in there so that when I fold it over on the edge, that it doesn't create a crease like you're wrapping a package, but it'll be a smoother fold because that copper is quite a bit thicker than, say, a piece of wrapping paper if you were wrapping a box. So I place everything face side down. And I found that when I wrapped this that it stayed on. I did get some double stick tape that I thought I might need to use to adhere the copper, but once I wrapped it, it stayed on there. So I just pulled up each side, and it's 36 gauge copper. I think that's maybe about 5 times as thick as a piece of aluminum foil. And I think because I'm wrapping it around that back edge also, that is what helps it to not need an adhesive. And then I just wrapped it up and folded it around the bottom. Now while I was waiting for the copper to distress, I couldn't resist pulling out some tags and thinking of some words that were going to allow me to refocus some of the things I've been slacking on in all this COVID mess. So for 2021, I decided I'm going to focus more on creativity, to persist, and not give up on myself, to regain some healthy habits that I've kind of let go by the wayside, and to finish projects that I start. So I just tucked those in my little copper pocket, and I'm hanging that on the wall beside my desk in the studio, and I'm going to remember to focus on my creativity. Here's some little in-process photos of when I was making the tags. I just used stamps and this stamp ink and the stencils from Shawn. Close-up of the copper. That's the embossed on the bottom, debossed on the bottom, and that is my canvas. Thank you for watching. Like or subscribe below. You can find me on social media, Chestnut Grove Studios.